Welcome, addicts. All right, we are going over our early tight end rankings, looking at the top 10 tight end projections that we have heading into the 2020 season. If you guys are looking for a full list of rankings, we actually have them posted up on our website now. Check them out at fantasyaddictionnetwork.com, and we'll be doing individual player breakdown videos going a bit more in depth as to how we got these projections, what we can expect from these players heading into 2020. But without further ado, let's begin with number 10, Jared Cook for the New Orleans Saints. Jared Cook actually had a really productive year last year and was one of the most useful tight ends towards the end of the season. We're expecting a little bit of a regression in terms of the total touchdowns scored. I think Emmanuel Sanders is going to demand a little bit more volume in the red zone. And the main reason for the drop in touchdowns is mostly due to the inclusion of Alvin Kamara being able to play the full season. He barely scored any touchdowns last year, and we're expecting that to change a good bit. So that brings the overall volume for Jared Cook down a little bit, but we're still expecting a pretty good year. 50 receptions, 695 yards, and 6 touchdowns. I don't expect Adam Troutman to be too involved in season one. Tight ends are rarely involved too much in the passing game in their first season. So we're still expecting Jared Cook to have a pretty good year. All right, and number 9, we're expecting a pretty improved season from Mike Gesicki here, regardless of whether or not Tua or Ryan Fitzpatrick is at the helm. And where the unfortunate thing about tight ends, and this is going to be a really interesting year to try to navigate the tight end landscape, because there's a lot of hype around these tier 4, tier 5 guys like Mike Gesicki, and even though we're expecting a really good season from him, these stats still, when you actually put them into perspective, they're probably going to come from 4 to 6 really good games, and then a lot of weeks that you're probably not going to be too happy starting him, and that's typical for a tight end. But you still want tight ends that have the ability to blow up week by week, and I think Mike Gesicki definitely gives you that. I think the Dolphins' defense is still a work in progress, and we're still expecting them to have a decently high pass volume. If they do switch to Tua, I think that might lower their number of passing attempts slightly each week, but I don't think it's going to do too much. It's not like Tua is a running quarterback by any means, so I think Tua could actually be more efficient, and it's outside of Devontae Parker and Preston Williams there. It's not a lot of other people that are demanding targets. Albert Wilson is okay, good at yards after catch, but he doesn't demand a lot of targets. So Mike Gesicki could actually massively outperform his total touchdowns here as well. If he ends up being the main red zone threat, that could jump all the way up to 9 or 10. And so we're expecting a good year from him, but he could definitely massively outperform these projections. All right, jumping to number 8, we have Hunter Henry heading there for the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, with the Chargers, these projections are very hard to do for the passing game, just because, for one, we don't know whether Tyrod Taylor is going to play the entire season or at what point they're going to switch over to Justin Herbert. But we're expecting this offense to have a little bit of a regression in terms of total passing attempts and just overall offensive efficiency, moving from Phillip Rivers down to Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert. We're expecting both of them to get playing time at some point this year. So whether or not Hunter Henry is going to be nearly as involved as he was when Phillip Rivers was playing is yet to be seen, but rookie quarterbacks do typically rely on running backs and tight ends as kind of their safety blanket, their comfort pillow, being able to throw over the middle of the field rather than the more challenging outside and deeper routes. So Hunter Henry could still be heavily involved. The franchise tagged him and are looking to give him a big deal, so it doesn't look like the organization is trying to phase him out by any means. So he could definitely outproduce this, but right now I have him projected pretty conservatively, just considering all the variables heading into the season for the Chargers. At number 7, we have Darren Waller. Now, this might surprise some people to have him so low, but we're a bit more hesitant to attribute Darren Waller's success and bring it over into the following season. And a lot of that has to do with just the fact that Darren Waller really produced last year when there weren't any other targets around him. He produced better in the games when Hunter Renfrow was out. He produced better in the games when Tyrell Williams was dealing with an injury. Whenever Hunter Renfrow came back, his stats took a massive decline, but now you add Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards into the mix. You add Lynn Bowden, who they're most likely going to use, taking him in the 3rd round. I can't see them not using him somewhat. Hunter Renfrow, is still there, and Foster Moreau was also getting some usage last year. And they went out and acquired Jason Witten. I don't know how much they're expecting to use him, but there are a lot of players that they added in terms of offensive, pass catchers. So it's hard to expect Darren Waller is going to see the same share of the receiving pie that he had last year, which was the primary reason that he performed so well for fantasy. All of those reasons being said, we're still expecting him to have a good season, but I've seen some people have him projected for like 8 touchdowns or like 90 receptions. It's just a little bit ludicrous for Darren Waller to be that high. So we have him projected a bit lower. We're just expecting him to not be. We're expecting to be closer to the games when more of the players on offense last year were healthy, and less than the way it was when he was basically the only guy receiving passes from Derek Carr. We could also even see a quarterback being changed from Derek Carr to Marcus Mariota. So there's a lot of variables here heading into the season with the Raiders. So that's why we have Darren Waller at number 7. Probably not a guy that we're going to really see in any of our drafts this year. All right, jumping over to number 6, we have Tyler Higbee. Definitely some variables here as well, but we'll get a little bit into why in this video. And like I said, we're going to be breaking down each of these guys individually, going a bit deeper over their week by week stats from last year, some other interesting news and notes to give you guys a deeper understanding as to how we got to these projections. But Tyler Higbee was a clear difference maker for the Rams towards the end of the season last year when they switched to doing more 2 tight end personnel as the season went on. That really seemed to help their offense click again. They were fizzling out for the most part with their offensive line not able to really sustain any type of a good offense. Jared Goff took a step back statistically last year until he switched over to more 2 tight end sets. And once Tyler Higbee was on the field, I mean, just going back and watching game film, every single time they threw to Tyler Higbee, he found a way to get himself wide open. So he was a clear difference maker, and I would find it really hard to believe that the Rams would be like, nope, we're going to go back to just playing Gerald Everett, who was never as efficient as Tyler Higbee was last year. And while Gerald Everett is still there, which will lower the ceiling of Tyler Higbee, it's hard to imagine the Rams and Sean McVay, who we still believe is a good coach, put that genie back in the bottle. So we're expecting another good season from Tyler Higbee, but his price may be a little bit too expensive going around the 7th, 8th round right now. At number 5, we have Evan Engram. This is another risky one, but has a lot of ceiling here. Evan Engram was heavily involved in the games that he was healthy, but at this point, that is the biggest concern you have with Evan Engram. Also coming off a Liz Frank injury, typically you see a statistical drop in players coming off of the injury of about 20%. So that is a bit concerning, but considering if you would actually project the games Evan Engram played fully healthy, he would see a stat line a lot more ridiculous than this. I feel like we have a solid middle ground projection between what his ceiling could be and what we expect it to actually get down to, just with the projected efficiency drop due to that recovery of the Liz Frank injury. Now, if he suffers another injury, then at that point we're probably never going to touch him again. And I understand now why a lot of people would still be afraid. If you can get him in the 8th round, I think it's worth the risk because he gives you tight end league winning upside. He has the ability to join that top tier of tight ends, but he just has not been able to stay healthy, which has been the bane for his career. But Daniel Jones coming on and looking to be the rising star in the fantasy quarterback lens, Evan Engram could be a huge reason for that. Hopefully he can finally play a season where he's actually able to be on the field for all 16 games. All right, jumping up to number 4, Zach Ertz. We still like him. We still think he's going to be the most targeted receiver or receiving weapon, I guess I should say, for Philadelphia. Jalen Reagor coming in definitely should be pretty heavily involved, but Alshon Jeffrey also recovering from a Liz Frank injury, and he's a bit older, so we're not expecting him to take as much passing volume this year. And then Deshaun Jackson can't stay healthy, so this could very quickly turn into a Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, Jalen Reagor, and Miles Sanders as the only main receiving options, and it's hard to project Zach Ertz as not getting the similar target share as what he has been. We actually have him projected a little bit lower than where he typically goes, but overall, still in PPR, getting over 70 receptions for a tight end is automatically going to put you in the upper echelon of guys. He could very easily outperform his projected 5 touchdowns. Right now, I have him about 191 fantasy points, and I feel like that's on the lower end of the range of outcomes. So, still having him as number 4 definitely gives you the ability to have a difference maker at tight ends. And I've seen him drop in some drafts. I'd be comfortable probably grabbing him around round 5. I think his ADP is a bit higher than that right now, but again, it's a little bit volatile because a lot of fantasy players don't really know what to make of the Eagles right now. And jumping over to number 3, we have Mark Andrews, who, while we're not expecting him to be as efficient in the touchdown department this year, it's hard to ignore the fact that they shipped Hayden Hurst away. They did add Devin Duvernay, but they didn't really do too much else to improve the passing offense in Baltimore, and we do expect them to throw the ball a little bit more. All that being said, it's hard to find a reason to not like Mark Andrews heading into the season. Yes, he was oft injured last year, but he really didn't miss too much time. He played through the injuries and he played well. His snap percentage was always low, but whenever he was on the field, he was getting targeted on a high percentage of his routes, and he was productive on that. Playing for a smart coach, you can assume rational coaching when you're talking about guys like John Harbaugh. So it would be hard to imagine them basically looking at Mark Andrews and saying, no, you're going to play behind Nick Boyle now. And there's a reason that Mark Andrews was able to break out last year and still incredibly young. We expect him to have another really good season this year. Might be a little pricey. He's typically going around the 3rd round, and there's so many really good receivers at that point. I'm probably not going to end up drafting Mark Andrews too many times, but do really like his ceiling this year. Have him coming in right at about 204 fantasy points. Then we get to the chalk. We have number 2. We have George Kittle. Can very easily see him jumping up to number 1. Especially if this team has to throw the ball a little bit more, if their defense takes a little bit of a step back and Jimmy Garoppolo has to throw the ball a little bit more this season. They didn't really do too much to upgrade their receivers other than they did draft Brandon Ayuk, but Emmanuel Sanders is gone. Jalen Hurd is back, so that could dip into the overall passing volume, and obviously Deebo Samuel should take a little bit more of a step forward into year 2, but George Kittle is the engine of this offense and should continue to see the highest share of targets in that for that team. We're expecting him to have about 81 receptions and over 1,000 yards. Could easily outperform his total touchdowns of 7, but we're projecting him a little bit. We're projecting him around his average, maybe a little bit higher, and could very easily outperform that, but that still gives us a pretty massive boost over the other guys ranked behind him. Again, if you can get him in the 3rd round, that ends up being a lot easier. It's still just outside of tight end premium leagues. It's hard to ignore the value you can get in receiver, but that tier does typically drip over into round 4. So I fully understand taking George Kittle near the back of the 2nd and early 3rd round, about where he's going right now. And then Travis Kelce has been the top tight end, and we're expecting that to continue just with the overall passing volume in this offense. Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill should continue to get the majority of the targets and the touchdowns on this offense. Having projected at 89 receptions, close to 1,100 yards, and 7 total touchdowns, both Travis Kelce and George Kittle could very easily come close to the 10 touchdown range. We're just not projecting something that doesn't typically happen for tight ends, but it could definitely happen there for Travis Kelce. I don't think the gap between Kelce and Kittle is as far as ADP is showing right now, because Kelce is almost a full round ahead of Kittle. I would draft them basically right next to each other. If you can get Travis Kelce near the end of the 2nd, early 3rd round, it's really hard to ignore the difference maker that having a top tier tight end gets for you. If you don't get Travis Kelce or George Kittle, most of the time I'm going to recommend you wait and grab a bunch of guys near the end of the draft and hope that one of them turns into the 2020 version of Mark Andrews. But if you get Travis Kelce or George Kittle, it makes the rest of your draft harder, but it's so valuable, especially in the playoffs, when you have a tight end that just gives you such an edge over your opponent. And Travis Kelce and George Kittle definitely give you more of that than anyone else in the NFL. But that was our top 10 early tight end rankings. Let us know in the comment section if you guys have any questions, or lay out your rankings below, see where we differ. And like I said, we're going to be breaking down all of these players individually, given a more in-depth look into how we got these projections, what we can expect from each player heading into 2020. So make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Also check out fantasyaddictionnetwork.com for a full list of rankings. And we'll see you guys in the next video.